Good afternoon and welcome to Lunchtime Shares with me, Kevin Britz, leading the charge with insights, information, and ultimately effective results. Joining me today is leadership and coaching segment. He's a researcher, a psychometrist, behavioral scientist, strategist, and data analyst, and he's the managing director of Psychonomics. Dr. Sean Smith, welcome to this show, Dr. Sean.
Thanks, Kevin. Great to be here for the second time, no less.
Yes, you have been here before with the GEDI assessment, but we are back with some new information and a new assessment, which I would love to dive into. But before we do that, just give us a bit of background about who you are, what you do, and what we are talking about today.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. So, I'm the MD of Psychonomics, which is originally a behavioral science consultancy. And in recent months, we have diversified into productizing the business, having seen quite a number of gaps in the market, especially as regards assessments within the workplace. So my belief is the assessment we're going to chat about today is affectionately known as GEDI. That one was built between myself and Professor Charlene Liu, who unfortunately couldn't join us today. But she and I built an executive level senior leadership style assessment. And I think that's the main crux of today. But yeah, we delve into consulting around the behavioral science space and then increasingly within the assessment space, especially for corporate and accredited coaches.
So, Dr. Sean, what we know is there's various assessments out there. There's Myers-Briggs, there's the Enneagram, there's the DISC profiling. Some people would be saying, what are we going to do with this new assessment? But because I've been afforded the opportunity to become a practitioner to it. Don't you want to unpack, how does the GEDI assessment distinguish itself from traditional psychological assessments, and what is unique about the insights that it provides to an executive team?
Yeah, so I think all of the assessments that we produce have some edge to them that fills a gap that we're seeing is not quite being filled at the moment. So many of the existing assessments you've mentioned them, and there are others as well, they're not inaccurate, they're not invalid in any way, shape, or form. However, they don't always fill the purpose that corporates are seeking, and medium-sized enterprises too. So certain personality constructs or substrates might be measured perfectly, but the age-old question is one of, so what now? What then? To what end? So essentially what we've done with this particular assessment that we're referring to today is that it is designed specifically for senior management, execs, and board level. So those sorts of top strata within an organization, which we would loosely call leadership teams. Now, what this assessment does is it allows for anonymous input. So I will not be able to track an assessment back to Kevin or Bob or Jane or whoever, and that is by design. So at those senior levels, we want transparency, we want information that is reliable and dependable, but we also do not want it provided in a manner that opens things up to fear or to nepotism or to any other underhanded activities that could take place, right? So what we do is we report at the group level. So instead of it being Kevin is XYZ or Kevin is ABC sort of person, all of the items are posed in such a fashion as to be my team tends to, or members of this team are, or members within this setup tend to be, whatever it might be. And then we aggregate through our algorithms the results. And I think we'll probably touch on what we measure exactly. But the real differentiators are essentially that it takes 12 minutes to complete, so it's quick. Secondly, it operates at the level of the team. Okay, so not just the aggregation of the individuals or the individuals in isolation, but the functionality of that overall team. And we have novel constructs that have not been seen before. Things like cooperative engagement, things like flexibility at that level of strategic decision-making, things like the ability to take bold action and how power dynamics are shared and so on. So yeah, in a nutshell, that's really what we're looking at, which is very different to anything out there at the moment.
So, can you explain to us, with the GEDI assessment, a situational approach can adapt to the changing dynamics within a team over time, and how should organizations use these insights to maintain and improve teams' effectiveness? Because, like you're saying, there's some constructs and some information that's being measured that's not necessarily you wouldn't find anywhere else. So tell us more about how does the situational approach adapt to that changing dynamic?
So I think it's probably important to emphasize that we only go to market through certified and reputable coaches to begin with. Okay, so whoever unpacks these profiles for this particular assessment, if it lends itself to group coaching, whoever unpacks these things is accredited, wholly accredited in that instrument, such as yourself, and is experienced and is a reputable individual. So there's that. Okay, so let's begin with that. That these results wouldn't take place in sort of isolation, if you will, and people wouldn't just be given a report and told to run off with it. There's a lot of conversations, a lot of engagements that take place because of the result. Okay, so that is sort of, let's park that for a moment. I think secondly, to get to your question, how do we account for context and situational sort of adaptations and so on? So that is equal parts the assessment, being that it accounts for so many leadership variables and leadership constructs that it really taps into the sort of 360, if you will, of the landscape of being in a leadership team. Equally, our thinking around moving through and moving alongside reputable coaches is that those individuals can absorb what's going on in a room, okay, based on the quantifiable results that we provide, and can actually provide the impetus and the input for those teams to move through the adaptations, the conflict, the flexibility, the impending issues, past issues, strengths as well. Let's not forget that we do emphasize a lot in the way of strengths, as well as areas to work on further. So there's a lot to take in. I think you and I were recently talking about this offline, and we pretty much agreed that with an assessment like this, it's built around ongoing engagement with a team in a way that's not a short, sharp, in and out kind of approach, but really one where we guide those leadership teams into fulfilling their purpose even better than they're currently able to.
Love that. And so, I mean, just to sort of emphasize some of those constructs, do you want to just go into what are some of those things that we're aiming to measure, and then perhaps the subconstructs that are sort of making up the constructs that we are looking at?
Yeah, by all means. I think I'll have to do that fairly briefly, as there are quite a few. Excuse me. So what we look at initially is, respect and authenticity. So how respectful is that team as they come forward with each other, and how authentic are they? Are they bringing their true selves forward? Associated with that, we talk about shared intuition. So to what extent are the intangible kind of non-verbal cues kind of linking one another around that table? I use the word table proverbially now, but to what extent are we seeing through one another without needing to fully express that? It's a sort of deeply human thing. We look then at power dynamics. So how much fairness is there in the treatment of those around that hypothetical table at, let's say, an executive team? To what extent is power fluid in that team? So do we have one autocrat who barks orders, or is there a certain sense of it goes beyond equity even, but a genuine sense of democracy? Furthermore, we measure decisiveness. So this is one of our favorite ones, really, because the need for leadership teams to show not necessarily rapid decision-making, but competent decision-making, and being able to stick to a decision, failing which there can be trouble, okay? But also the ability to remain agile, so not just sticking blindly to a decision. So we measure that at the group level. We also look at the ability to navigate conflict. We look at fortitude, which consists of a sense of resilience and determination to achieve those goals for the leadership teams. We look at well-being, so your sense of well-being as a part of that team, but also the capacity of others in the team to support one another. Furthermore, we have a good look into transparency. So we see transparency as something that requires a certain boldness, a certain honesty, a certain accountability, particularly within a leadership team, a senior team. We look at executive confidence as well. So the belief in the team's abilities to not only maintain goals, but achieve them and to back themselves in doing so. So it's almost like a sense of collective leadership, self-efficacy, if we can look at it that way. And then we look at team efficiency. So how efficiently do we as a team believe we're making use of time, money, raw materials, human resources as well. And finally, what we look at is a culmination of these factors that can lead to impact. Now, impact is a fairly innocuous term, but what we refer to there are two sub areas. One is internal focus. So how we collectively shape the internal culture of the organization, the wider organization, through our positive and constructive engagements, or we don't, or the things to work on, which we break down under that coaching relationship, of course. And then the second factor is external. So that external focus, we call it collective advocacy. So how much do we as a collective contribute to positive social, environmental, and governance type issues outside just of our organization? And so that really, in a nutshell, is it. I mean, you know better than most. The report itself comes out at about 25, 30 pages of a lot to consume. When I say a lot, it's not daunting. It's easy to chew on, especially under the right coaching circumstances. But it gives a lot of food for thought and a lot to review for a senior team, and a lot of really constructive conversations that we think can take place.
And Dr. Sean, so I mean, just from a coach's perspective, what's interesting about this, if you look at, respectful authenticity, you look at decisiveness, you look at well-being, a lot of people are going to ask, so, how are you actually going to measure that? But yeah, I mean, through just language and through using certain types of language, we know that you can elicit information in a certain way. So I'm assuming, when we go through, when you design the actual program, taking into consideration the types of language and the types of questions you're asking around eliciting the right kind of information, that is really the point. Because, sometimes people won't just blatantly say, well, I just feel like, certain people in power are just being X, Y, and Z, or they don't have all the answers to wanting to say that. So the background, the design of the actual assessment, there has to be, I'm assuming there has to have been a lot of sort of insights that come from how humans actually construct information and to elicit the right kinds of information from that.
Definitely. I mean, you as someone who's gone through the user manual would have noted how many scientific citations we have in that. Of course, that's in part because we are academic nerds, but on the other part, it was inspired initially by our own views on how executives are functioning. And it's very easy to judge from the outside because being a leader within business is difficult. It's no mean feat, and it's not easy. And it's easy to sit on the sidelines and make judgments. What we rather wanted to do was put something together that allows anonymity, as we said, but allows the ability to, as a group, tap into those factors that are important, according not only to literature, but experience, and for us to have conversations. By us, I mean the leadership team, whoever they may be in whatever organization, alongside a coach, and to be guided through those constructive conversations that need to take place for us to get to where we'd like to be. And of course, we don't have enough time to go through, in fine detail how we report, but we look at all the stats that we can look at without really assigning values to any one person, in maintaining that anonymity. But we look at how divergent or convergent the views are within a team based on certain factors. We look at whether there's a general consensus that we're really not where we need to be, or that we're really shooting the lights out, or somewhere in the middle. We look at the number of sort of outliers within a certain perceptual realm. So whether that's the ability to keep each other, psychologically safe, or it's the ability to make sound decisions, or to maintain some democratic kind of input, whatever it might be, we're able to hone in and really start those conversations. And I think, again, Kevin, you and I agreed just recently that a lot of this assessment is about empowering the coaches to start conversations. It's about giving the coach and the leadership team a rudder to have the right conversations, and then for the coach to continue those right conversations in the right way. So essentially, it starts conversations that we would never have had before, would never necessarily have thought to have, and it really provides the direction towards arriving at a place where we can really improve. I mean, there's no such thing as perfection with this. That's the beauty of it, essentially. but we can get to a place where we are taking the right actions. We are transparent with each other. We are maintaining respect. We are instilling and engendering the right sort of culture internally. We're showing the right face externally. Power moves around as it needs to, based on context, situation, or needs of the internal, external environment. And we are more intuitive with one another and more supportive of one another as a leadership team, whether we're the board of directors, or we an exco or a sub-exco or a senior management team reporting to a sub-exco. Any one of those strata all require these sorts of things in place. So just last thought is to also stress that while we do create instruments that are meant for any working team, this particular one is really for the senior teams within corporate organizations mostly. And it really taps into those things or those structures that they really need in place, both as individuals and interpersonally as a group. Yep.
Well, what I do find interesting, Dr. Sean, is when we went through, some of the reports and looking at some of the areas, what does highlight and showcase quite significantly is, as you say, because things are anonymous, you're just looking at information, you're looking at data, and what it does, from what I've seen from the assessments and the data, is what it does allow is to start, as you mentioned, probing conversations that generally people might not want to even have conversations about. But it also gives you insights on your blind spots, right? Because I know that, like you say, nothing is ever going to be perfect. But essentially, because we're human, because we bias, because we all have biases and we all have those blind spots. Sometimes, even in the position of power, you might be the individual who is who has the blinkers on, right? And with an assessment like this, it really brings out some dynamics that you're unaware of, but it also opens a good coaching opportunity for the group to discuss, where they are going and what they would like to achieve, and what are some of those fundamentals in their leadership team that could be skewing them or throwing them off kilter, which they're completely unaware of.
Yeah, absolutely. I think to that point, what we're seeing is the allowance of anonymity is quite powerful at the senior levels, and it's really because it's not always easy to have a voice in those sessions. I mean, it should be easy, in a perfect world, but it's not always easy to say to, let's say, your CEO, look, we are not the most democratic group, or the way that we are conducting ourselves is not lending itself to the best culture in all of those teams reporting into us from the bottom up. But this allows for that place, but it also allows for constructive, we keep using that word, but constructive discussions. It's not about pointing fingers. It's not about saying that we're doing a horrid job, not at all. It's about giving us that space to be able to point to the data. It makes a conversation a lot easier when you can point to a chart as projected by a coach, let's say, and say, look, 40% of our team is feeling psychologically unsafe. So imagine how the teams under us are feeling. And it gives us a lot of, again, use that same word, constructive discussions that can take place. I think what we're also seeing is, as the coaches delve in many respects, often the team leader is the person who's got their head buried just a little bit. They're not always as aware that they're sort of fellows in the room are feeling a certain way. And that often opens the door for one-on-one coaching, if need be. In other cases, you have other outliers who have a different perception, and that comes out in the room, because as we hand over to the room, and no one needs to say, hey, well, I am respondent number 3, and kind of give themselves away, but they can add to that conversation. And as it ensues and as it continues, so the coach gains greater insight into what's really going on. So the others around the table also do while their respective peers are speaking, to really deepen the relationships that they have as well. One of the, it's almost going to become a payoff line with the instruments that I've been building, but one of the key things is that we do not for a moment state that an instrument alone is going to change the world or change an organization. But if you build the right instruments, you empower the teams and the coaches to work together, to have conversations that we'd never have had before, and to highlight prominent issues that need to be broached, or areas where they really, really are doing very well, and to figure out ways to maintain that. So you asked right at the beginning of this conversation about differentiators, so perhaps that's one that I omitted, which is that we do not prescribe that this is going to alter the universe. It is really going to create the conditions for the right conversations to happen. And you'll also see in our reports, anyone who takes up the service offering and the product offering, we are very non-prescriptive in boxing people or groups into categories up front before getting to know them and before seeing how the data works for them contextually, situationally, and dynamically. And we put a lot of that in the trusted hands of the coaches who we cherry pick, as you come to see. So, yeah.
So, I mean, this is a question I'm going to ask, but I mean, I know the answer, but I'd like to, from your opinion and from your insights, given the GEDI report might uncover some personal needs among the team members, how can organizations effectively balance the individual coaching with team level intervention to ensure both personal and organizational growth? Because, as we were recently chatting around this is, if you were to look at the assessment with one of the leaders in an environment, you could say, there are potential people who might want additional assessments. They might want additional coaching in a personal, individual capacity because they may not feel comfortable doing it out in an open forum. But I mean, how do we balance those two, like from a personal intervention to team intervention, so that there is actual personal and organizational growth?
Yeah, so I think just off the cuff, I'm seeing three sources of that, if I could call them sources. The first is that prior to the coaching relationship taking place, prior to an assessment even taking place, the coach or the representative who's come in as, let's say, interventionist will oftentimes be briefed anyway and be told, there's a culture problem, or we're bringing you in for a reason. In which case, you get some nice insights into the sorts of instruments that you might deploy in addition to GEDI, okay? Because this is meant to be a team-level assessment for senior teams. Doesn't purport to be anything else. But it is not at odds with deploying other assessments, some of which we offer, some of which might be offered outside, okay? So that would be your second source, which would be other instruments. So the first source would be a briefing up front, okay, from an organization that identifies an issue. Second one would be the deployment of this instrument and or others that identifies issues or areas of improvement. And the third source for me, which I think is actually the most powerful source, is what comes out due to the group coaching or as a result of the group coaching. So this is where an example that we used a moment ago was a CEO who starts to realize, wow, I'm a bit out of tune with this team. I thought I really knew where they were all sitting, feeling, thinking. Meanwhile, they feel like authority is really not very nicely shared. They feel that their well-being is at stake. They're burning out. They feel that we're not instilling the kind of culture that we claim to instill, or that I thought we were instilling. And that generally results quite powerfully for me in that individual reaching out and saying, thank you for the group coaching. I think I need some one-on-one as well. Or the coach identifying and saying, obviously in a polite fashion, but saying, look, it's evident that we do well just to assist you in maybe moving some of those blinkers away, or maybe becoming more in tune with the team's needs and just reflecting a bit. And yeah, so I think it's a fairly loose response, I suppose, but I'd say that those are the three fairly organic ways that we figure out how to position the coaching alongside the instrument or over and above the instruments. But I think that the instruments are very powerful in linking that need, assuming that we deploy the right instruments. And so far, so good. This has been really, really excellent, this instrument at those senior levels and at the group level, getting that group meshed and functioning better.
Absolutely. So, I mean, Dr. Sean, there's so much about this assessment that we could unpack. We have the pillars of the GEDI. We also know that you've supported that information with values and how to support the GEDI with certain values and what those values look like and are essential for high performing teams and great sort of cultures. But I mean, if we could leave an audience, a senior exec or anyone looking at today's information and sharing this information, what do you want them to take away from the GEDI assessment, and why should they be part of it?
Yeah, so I think a few things. Firstly, leadership is becoming more and more in focus. I might even be tempted to say in vogue, but I think in focus is more important because leadership has always been important objectively, but it's under the microscope more. Informally, you can walk into your local bookstore and there are 100 books on leadership. More formally, it's become instilled in academic programs, on MBA courses, etc., etc. And I think that if we as leaders are not willing to be reflective at the group level and the individual level, we're going to miss a trick. Okay, so this is really built to fill a potential void that we don't even know we have. All right, again, individually or group-wise. Secondly, what I would touch on is, as you mentioned, the values. So what we haven't gone into, and we don't have a lot of time left, but we do a values assessment here as well. So over and above the constructs and sub-constructs mentioned, we also look at things that constitute values overall. So this includes things like truthfulness, courteousness, transparency, results orientation, levels of responsibility shown, and so on. There are about 30 different values, and we do score them towards the end of the report. So I think it's very helpful to do a deep dive into what are our actual values. It's easy for us to sit and put a mission statement together and a vision and so on, but what are we living out as a group, values-wise? So I think that's another reason to do it. And I think a third reason, and I seem to be working in threes today, but a third reason is that overall, the ability for a team to go and get the feedback and sit and have a dedicated session in a room together that they might not ordinarily have. Sure, they'll have excos and they'll have link-up meetings and they'll have sometimes team building, whatever it might be, but to have dedicated ongoing sessions under expert coaching, deep diving novel group level constructs that they have probably not actually assessed themselves on before, can only have positive knock-on effects. I mean, there is literally no negative or no risk, unless, of course, that there are such deep troubles that we are exploding at the seams with them. But in such a case, it would be evident that we need this anyway. So certainly no revelations from that side. So yeah, if that makes sense to you, I think those are really the three most pressing areas where I would say this is definitely something that leadership teams need to consider.
Absolutely. Thank you, Dr. Sean. I mean, I know we don't have a hell of a lot of time, but thank you for just giving us a bit of an insight on the Global Executive Dynamics Inventory, and that's what GEDI stands for, guys. So if you want to find out more, please hit me up, and Dr. Sean, will gladly be chatting to you about the assessment. He's a researcher, a psychometrist, behavioral scientist, strategist, data analyst, and the managing director of Psychonomics. That's Dr. Sean Smith. Thank you so much for joining us, and come back anytime.
Thanks, Kevin.
Cheers for now. Bye.
Cheers.